Oh, welcome. Okay, this is exciting. Um, so, yeah. So just one thing about lives is that if we both talk at the same time, they don't hear us. So we'll keep passing on the mic. Okay, so you want to start by introducing yourself. What's your name? What do you do?
Okay, so my name is Sarah Rivkah Kohn, and I always say my way of an introduction is I lost my mother when I was 9, and about 14 years ago it is now, I started Lynx and Schleime's Club. Well, I started Lynx 14 years ago for girls who had lost a parent. And then about 7 years ago, Mimi Gross actually approached me after her husband, Shleimi Gross, passed away, and she said, "Why aren't you doing anything for boys?" And I said, "Because I'm a little slightly overwhelmed." So she founded Schleime's Club, named after Shleimi, and then we partnered together. And now we service the boys and the girls who have lost a parent. So over 14 years, the nice part is that I've gotten to see a lot of kids and teens come through the door who maybe have struggled a lot then and be able to see them now as alumni doing incredible things in this world.
Wow, so nice. I'm like tearing up already, and we didn't even start. Okay. So we're going to jump into the questions now, and then if people have questions here, we'll stop and we'll take some questions, and then we'll wait for the rest at the end. So we'll start with question number 1. Let me just take this on. And here we go. Let me know if you see this. I'll have you read it so that...
Okay. So the thing is, how do I explain to my kids all about Bubby and Shamayim? I mention her all the time and try to explain, but there's no way they really get it. And what's the right way to explain it and discuss it? My oldest is 6.5. Thank you for saying the age, because it does make a difference. And knows she is named for her, but even though she isn't a baby, Baruch Hashem, she really doesn't have a concept of death. I would love her to know. I would love to know how to navigate this. It's something that I've always wondered and discussed with others, but it isn't so clear cut. Also, 4 out of 5 of us all have girls named for my mother. We always make a big deal out of it. They even think it's funny, but in no way do they realize the significance. Okay, a few questions came in similar to this. Basically, at what age should we begin explaining it to them, or is it something that comes along with time? Somebody else also asked, how do we explain it to them? I think we're done with the question the way it was that way. The rest of it, we separated. Somebody else also asked, how do we explain it without causing undue fear in children? And the reason why I said it's important to see the age is because at different stages, developmentally, children, A, discover different kinds of things. B, is it's okay to have certain kinds of discussions with them. Now, one of the things that I have to say, I'm sorry, my phone stand broke, so I'm going to keep switching hands. One of the things that I like to say a lot in terms of death is that we project whatever our feelings are. So if death is very scary to you, and it is scary to most of us, our children at all ages will pick that up. So in the question somewhat lies the answer, is that if you feel death is a scary thing, you're going to scare the daylights out of your child. Think about the fact for 1 second, though. When we say Vayamas Avraham, right, or we say any of the psukim, and Avraham died, can most parents say that looking in the mirror in a calm, kind of factual way? That's the way I like it explained to young children. What I would suggest, and what was suggested to me, and I'll be honest, my oldest is named for my mother as well. She's now going into high school. But when she was little, and I really questioned this, like, how do I say it? It's so scary. And I remember one of the clinical advisors that we had on our team, and I'm so blessed, I have a bunch of clinicians I work with, said to me at the time, if you are terrified of it, bad time to talk about it. Work through your fear of death, and only then can you bring this up. And that's fine. There's no pressure. There's no rush to put it at a particular timing. One of the things that she suggested that I do is nonchalantly put a picture of my mother on the fridge in one of these plastic sleeves and just leave it there. And naturally, a curious child will say, "Ma, who's that?" Right? So it's hard for us who've lost a parent to bring it up in conversation, but if somebody else asks, it kind of minimizes that. So that's a really good piece, especially for young children. And they say, "Who's that?" And what's really good to say at that point is, that was my mother. It's good to associate, not just, especially for those whose parents are remarried, and we're going to talk about that later. It's good to say that was my mother, who is your bubby, who you are named after, or that was my mother, this is your Savta, whatever it is, right, that you would call her. Use that kind of language. So you're giving them a double association. One is who that person was to you, and one is what that person would have been to them. That's very important, especially for young children. That age 6 is perfect for this. Younger than that, you could just, make it, again, just really simple. You're keeping it really simple. You do not have to go into, and she died when I was 11 after she had cancer for 7 years, and it was drastic. You don't have to go into the drama. At that age, I would say, at least till about 7, 8, you want to just put the facts there. And if they say to you, so where is she now? You could say, she's in Shamayim, she was Nifter many years ago. Now, here's the weird part. Kids don't ever think you were a child. And this clinician pointed it out to me really well. So what happens is, even when the kid is 5, and you say she died a lot of years ago, that's still safe for them, because as far as they were concerned, you were a mother for forever. So you're not necessarily, I don't say that it's criminal to say to a child at that age, oh, she died when I was 5. But a child may not be ready to hear that about their mother. It kind of plants undue fears. So what I like to say is she passed away a lot of years ago. As the child grows older, usually about the 3rd, 4th, 5th grade age is when you want to introduce the concept of what that many years ago might have meant. Oh, yeah, and again, be comfortable with it, whether that's you're in therapy, whatever way you're going to work this out. It needs to be something you're completely comfortable with, and then it won't pass on any fears. And then in terms of talking to them, another great way is any recipes. Like if you're using any of your mother's recipes for a yenta, for a Shabbos, for just a birthday cake, it's good to just at that point say, oh, by the way, that bubby who we have hanging on the fridge, my kids call her the bubby from the fridge, that bubby from the fridge, this was the cake she always made for my birthdays when I was growing up, and I'm so happy to make it for you. So there's a positive association with whoever this person was.
Right. Okay. I think you definitely answered that. Exactly. Someone just said eloquent and brilliant as always. Okay. Let's go on to the next question. Do you see it?
Yes. Baruch Hashem, I have both my parents, but they aren't emotionally available. They never were and never will be. My question is, A, how can I ensure that I am emotionally available I think she meant without stifling my children, given that I had no role model. B is, how do I forgive and move on for the many times I needed them, but they weren't available? This is a very, very hard question, okay? And I'm going to choose to answer more of the first than the second, because forgiveness is a separate conversation. I will say that with work, inner work, then that's the only piece when forgiveness can come in, and I don't know the complexities of what went on. It wouldn't be fair for me to discuss that. What I do want to discuss is the first piece of how can I be an emotionally healthy, aware, involved parent if I never had that, okay? And this would apply to mothers who have abandoned their children. So maybe you didn't have a mother for that reason. It could be a mother who, due to her challenges with whatever mental health issues she was suffering from, she may not have been able to be a good parent or parent at all. It may have been due to a death. It may have been due to alienation. There's so many different reasons why this can happen. And that's why I really was happy to use this question, because I think it applies to many women and many mothers in many situations. I think what we have to acknowledge is, the first thing is, we cannot give our children what we don't have, okay? And when I said that, first time I remember to one of my alumni, she looked at me, she goes, so I'm doomed. You just basically killed all my parenting opportunities. I said, if I killed yours, then I killed mine. So, hey, we're in the same boat, right? But that's not. What it means is that we're going to have to discover and develop tools within ourselves so that we have it to be able to give to our children. So, if you were not blessed to have a mother who could parent from an emotionally present, healthy place, the first thing we need to do is grieve that. okay, without grieving that, without skipping that step to a large degree, really compromises the healing process, the number two, the forgiveness piece, but it also compromises your ability to really understand what a parent is. When we fully grieve what we didn't have, we know what needs to be had. Think about that for a second. When we grieve what we didn't have, we know what needs to be had. And it's such a great line because it allows us then to acknowledge that, okay, I didn't have this. Oh, so children need that. And when we know that children need that, we're able to give it to them. So that kind of process, though, I will say, and I know a couple of the questions came in, tell me how to do this without therapy. This is one of those things that I'm going to say, I don't think there's a way to do this without therapy. When you've been in a situation where you've been raised for many years without an emotionally present or an emotionally capable person, or with an absentee parent, due to any reason under sun, and you want to be a healthy parent to your children, therapy is kind of a must and some sort of investment that you need to make into being the better parent for your child. If for whatever reason that is completely off the charts for you, not happening, not even through a clinic, and I'm not saying, I'm not going to go to all the different reasons that people give, but if that's really not going to work for you, the only other thing that I could tell you, and it's never enough, and it's never in place of, but it is somewhat helpful, is finding a healthy parenting role model and being able to run some situations by this person to be able to realize whether you have the insight enough to be giving your children what they deserve. But if you really want your children to have a much better upbringing than you had in that kind of situation, there's really no other way about it. The other thing that I wrote down for myself, because I didn't want to forget about it, is that the awareness sometimes comes a little bit muddled. Sometimes if we didn't have a parent who was emotionally aware, or we had a completely absentee parent, we make up in our heads what normal mothers are supposed to do. And when that happens is that we beat ourselves up. Because we're like, oh, no mother in the world would ever let her kid scream like this so she could take a shower. And then when you meet regular, healthy, normal mothers who've raised children who think that their parents are regular, healthy, normal mothers, and you discover that they needed to take a shower, and the kid screamed a bit, and nobody died, right? All in moderation. But really, really, it's about sometimes acknowledging and realizing and having the awareness of what healthy parents do and don't do, so that we don't go to either extreme. We don't repeat the mistakes, but we also don't go into being completely neurotic with ourselves and beating ourselves up, because that never leads to good parenting, by the way.
Right. Okay, let's go on to the next.
Okay, how to deal with the living spouse moving on after their spouse passed away. Case in point, my father's getting remarried. Oh, man. Okay. You are going to right now get... this answer is going to be loaded. Okay. So, there's two pieces to this. The quote-unquote moving on and the remarriage, and not always are the two the same. Surprise! Moving on can sometimes mean that a parent has gotten the tools that they need in order to somewhat put this tragedy on the side and allow them to cope with day to day. Okay, so I get the first part of the question sometimes from parents, from kids whose mother died, and they are dealing with all kinds of raging emotions, and they're like, my father is completely out of it. He doesn't even care that my mother died. He's fine. He goes to work. He has fun with his friends. He does this, that. I said, maybe that's his coping mechanism. Okay, so the first piece about moving on is sometimes we have to acknowledge that in order for your father or your mother or whatever surviving parent it is to have a normal, productive life and not be completely depressed and in bed and stuff of that sort, they need to find some way to occupy their lives and move on. And sometimes that's hard for a child to watch. And I'm not saying that isn't, but that's one piece. The remarriage piece is a different set of circumstances. My husband and I have been working on a project the last couple of years, actually, where my husband more than me, he's been meeting with married couples prior to their parents getting remarried. And part of the reason that I can't do that is it's an area that's highly triggering for me, and I tend to avoid it. Not because I'm practicing avoidance, but because I believe that somebody that's more objective does better in this particular field. And one of the things, I called him tonight, I said, what are the things that you say to those couples in those meetings? Because all they do is text me the next day of like, oh, that was so helpful. And I'm like, can't I be a fly in the wall? He said, you'll never keep your mouth shut. I said, okay. So I asked him, I said, what is it that you say to them? And he gave me a couple of really good, solid things. I actually wrote them down also. First thing is grieving the fact that with a remarriage, to some degree, you're losing the surviving parent. And acknowledging that. And that sounds so sad, but when we acknowledge that, then there's no shocker to it. And there's also a way of building some safety net around that. And I'll tell you a little bit, some ideas afterwards how. But acknowledging that with a new marriage comes a particular loss, and a parent who has married off a child can tell you that while it's the happiest time and they want nothing more than their child to be happy, there's a certain loss of the fact that now this child belongs to somebody else and that's their first vested interest. And so with the remarriage, oftentimes comes some sort of loss of that parent and grieving that. The other thing is that my husband says that he talks about the fact that there will be tremendous amount of change, and that oftentimes you will watch the parent turn to become more like the new spouse that they married. And it's like, are you kidding me? For 65 years, this is how you ate dinner and insisted you couldn't go to anybody's houses to eat, and suddenly you're going to her brother's house for dinner, like for reals? And there's a lot of conflicting feelings that comes with that. Does that mean she's more important than our mother was? All these things, when we talk about them, we mitigate them. Okay, so sometimes by ignoring them and feeling like, oh, this is just going to go just fine, we think that will make it better, but that usually makes it worse. So highlighting the fact that these are challenges that may very well come with it. Now, what do you do with all these challenges? The fact that the surviving parent will most likely change, there is a little bit of loss and stuff like that. Two pieces. One is adult children really creating good lives for themselves. So we are very big believers, and we'll talk about the self-care piece and acknowledging this and really building lives and acknowledging that there's a certain amount that you cannot control and you cannot cause. The other thing that is very helpful that my husband said he does tell some of the families, when there has been good, healthy communication up until this point with the parent, with the surviving parent. So this is not going to work for a parent who has some sort of emotional issue up until now. We're not recreating a parent because they've remarried. But if there was a good, healthy parent in this picture, having an open conversation and saying, Ta, I really don't want to lose you. And I really feel like sometimes this might be hard for us. And I'm just wondering if once a month we could get together, just us kids with you. And a lot of parents will be open to that. And keeping that sort of open connection, it's important not to use those times as venting fests of like, oh my God, you let her remodel the kitchen? That's not what it's meant for. It's meant to be relationship building moments. And those are really, really important. And I'm taking an extra couple minutes on this question because this has been the make it or break it factor for a lot of parental-child relationships, either being alienated or being strengthened. So take the time to do that. The other thing to know, just as a by the way, is that if you have single siblings who are living in the house when this parent remarries, just know that whatever you're hearing from that single sibling, you definitely have to keep your eyes and ears open because, God forbid, there could be an issue. And there are certainly a lot, but a lot of it is adjustment to like a new pair of shoes. And whatever you're hearing, you're only going to hear the negative because they'll never share with you the positive moments. So just acknowledge that. But really give yourself a big hug and really take good care of yourself and grieve this thing for real because it is a real painful situation.
I happen to know the person that sent in that question. Okay. One. Do you see it or should I zoom it?
is a little unclear for me to read. I'm not sure why. Being that my mother was sick for a few years and then died 4 years before I got married, I got used to not having people showing love and caring for me. Not that I wasn't loved. I was, Baruch Hashem, but only a mother really expresses it. Yeah, 100%. Now that I'm married, and thankfully I have an amazing husband who loves and cares about me, and it continues, and shows it, I'm finding it really hard. On the one hand, I know I should be grateful. Whoops, you moved it a little bit, so I'm not seeing.
You just was turning up the radio.
Sorry, I know I should be so grateful, but it really hurts, and I don't know how to deal with it. And please don't say therapy. So basically, I want ideas for how to deal with this without therapy. Okay. Thank you for handicapping me. Putting handcuffs on me right now. Right, I know. Okay. So a couple of years ago, actually, we arranged for an evening where a lot of our alumni could come and ask anything around our dining room table. And my husband and I sat there, and they basically wanted us as a couple that they could ask any questions, the married alumni, of like, what happens, And one of the questions that kept coming up again and again and again were two ends of this question. One end was, I'm finding it really difficult to accept love and be able to absorb it and take it because I'm so almost not used to it from a couple of years, or it triggers me so badly that I remember what a mother's love is like. And then there was the other end of the question, which came from some of the very frustrated spouses of like, what do I do when I'm doing everything and she seems to have put up a wall? And then there came the flip side of this, which is she so needs more love and more love and more love, and it seems to be an endless pit. This question is extremely normal, extremely common, but it is also at the core of what makes sometimes for a really painful situation within a marriage. You don't let me say therapy to you, so I'm not going to say therapy to you. I'm going to say to everybody else that this is a really good thing to work out in therapy. And I'll tell you what to do, though, in therapy, okay? So it's not about going in there and saying, I have this problem. It's about, again, a lot of it is grieving what you don't have and acknowledging what you do have and being able to be okay taking what you do have and recognizing why it's so hard for you to absorb that. In short, the research behind that is that we put up defense mechanisms. And the best example that I can give for this is when somebody goes into surgery and we give them anesthesia, it's so that they can absorb the pain of the surgery. Anesthesia only wears off at the time that the doctors believe the body is capable of absorbing and being okay with the level of pain and not, God forbid, going into some sort of shock. Same thing, HaKadosh Baruch Hu puts us into some sort of state of anesthesia, whether it's a defense mechanism, whether it's denial, whether it's I don't really need love, whether it's I can be okay, I'll take care of myself, I don't need anybody else, right? And that's how we survive as childhood warriors of living without the love of a parent, for lack of a better word. What happens when the anesthesia begins to wear off? Or what happens, when we come out of that surgery now? Okay, let's take this analogy. And you're in the marriage where, thank God, you have someone who's loving you and giving you all that, but the anesthesia hasn't worn off. You know what that feels like? Numb. Very hard to absorb love when you're feeling numb. So part of what needs to be dealt with is, how do I let this anesthesia wear off? How do I allow myself to be vulnerable? Now, if you want the non-therapeutic thing, and I don't think it substitutes, but it certainly can be a help in knowing the questions you can ask in therapy. Brene Brown's stuff on vulnerability is a direct link to not allowing this relationship to thrive in your life. So if you were to watch, I believe it's her TED Talk on vulnerability, you'll see the direct link that she talks about when a person cannot be vulnerable because they're terrified or they're in some sort of state of not allowing themselves to accept that lack of vulnerability is also the lack of what's allowing you to take in the love. So if you were to have to work on a particular skill in therapy, I would say it's the ability really to be vulnerable. It's not so much about the love per se, it's about being vulnerable. When we learn to be vulnerable and say, this is a need I have, and that need is to be loved, then we can take in the love.
All right. Okay. Let's get the next question. Nobody's asking any questions, but if you have any.
Everyone is so quiet. I was going to say, I feel like a little bit like I'm walking into, an elementary school classroom where everyone's just listening to me. I don't know. Come on. Okay. Question for Monday. How to know how to be a mom to your children when you weren't taught because you weren't lucky enough to have a mom to be there for you. Okay. Before everyone says that this one sounds like the previous question that we said about mothering, I wanted to say that there's a little bit of a different angle. Okay. I read this one. Shira, thanks. So one of the reasons I picked this question to do is because I want to focus now on the angle of what happens when you reach a particular age. And I'm not sure that this was what this person meant with the question, but I'm going to use it. See, I get to do whatever I want. But basically, what happens when you reach the age that you were parented till? If you did lose a parent and you had a good parent, okay, and suppose the parent passed away when you were 7 or 11 or 9 or 13, right? What happens at that point when you have a child who is a year older than that, or just about that age? So I'm going to share something in the light of being vulnerable here. My daughter, a couple years ago, was begging me to pack her briefcase before the first day of school. And I was so annoyed beyond words. I know it sounds petty, but there was like everything was going on in my house. And it was like, really? I'm like, do it yourself. And she was completely insulted. And I was feeling all guilty, right? This is the lovely cycle. We say no, then they get insulted, then I feel guilty, right? All the goodies. And I was feeling really stupid about it, and I couldn't put my finger on it. And incidences like this kept happening for like a few days. Like, she was asking me to do every stupid thing, and I just was feeling like I had all these other little kids, Baruch Hashem, in the house who did need me to physically do certain things. Like, can't you figure this out yourself? So again, thank God I have a wonderful therapist. And I said, look, something is going on here because this is not cutting it. I don't know. I don't feel like a good mother in my gut right now. So I know something's off. And she said to me, she says, how old is your daughter again? I'm like, she just turned 9. And she goes, and how old were you when your mother passed away? And I was like, oh, this is what they mean. I had read the book Motherless Mothers, which is, by the way, highly recommended. Motherless Daughters, Motherless Mothers by Hope Edelman. Bible on this stuff. And she has this whole chapter where she talks about what happens when you come of age, where your child, like, where you finished the parenting piece. Nobody parented you as a mother after that. And how do you figure it out from there? Like, right now I could tell you that sometimes I look at it and I'm like, do all normal mothers of 13-year-olds do this for their kid? And sometimes I will need to ask that. No shame. But what she acknowledged for me was that I was finding it frustrating because at that age, I was doing everything for myself. And I developed in my brain a conditioning that decided that 9-year-olds can do this because our only frame of reference is us, right? So if this worked for me as a kid, why isn't it working for you? Except that it shouldn't have worked for me as a kid. And it was a little bit of a pathetic situation that it had to work for me as a kid. So I'm trying to remember the original wording of this question. Had a mother when you were never taught. There are a lot of things that we were never taught, whether it was just by default or whether it was because our mothers weren't alive or around during that age. We need to learn what normal child development is for a child that age, what isn't okay, what a child should or shouldn't be, reliant on the parent, because no, we don't want to handicap our children and do everything for them, but we also want to make sure that we're giving them what they really, really deserve and need out of a parent. So that's really important. And when the person says, how do you mother? Really, mothering is so much more than the stuff we do. It's who we are. So building the person that you are into a loving, giving presence for your child, a secure presence, that's the greatest gift. And that's what you're going to give them. And you're going to get some things, quote unquote, wrong, and that's okay. as long as you are that presence of love in their life.
Okay. Could you answer the question over here? Do you see it?
Any advice for husbands on how to deal with their wives when they're remembering their loss and are sad? For that, you should probably ask my husband, and I don't think you'd like to hear the answers. But yeah, the spouses commiserate. There was actually a round table, and I'm sorry, I'm going to have to put in some black humor here. There was a round table at one of our Shabbatones, and for the girls who are on here, who are my alumni, and I see a few of you, just try to picture this. The spouses of some of us who lost a parent were sitting around one day, and they're talking about, are there advantages to our wives not having mothers? And one of them says, well, the only thing my mother-in-law says to me is nothing when I go visit her at the grave. So the other one says, he says, no, there's no advantage. He goes, but I'll tell you one thing. He says, we sure have learned how to build up and become different people than we would have been. And that's the real truth. A lot of our spouses, and certainly the husbands here, if we're going to reference mothers, have developed skills that are not usually known to men. Without being stereotypical, a little stereotypical, men typically aren't in tune to the nuances in our emotions, right? Now, what I find is that when we can give our spouses direction into what we need when we're sad, but don't tell it to them when you're sad. Try to do it at a time that you're not, and say, can I just tell you something? Like, let's say Yartzeit is really hard for me. Erev Yontif, a simcha in the family is hard for me. This is what I need you to do then. Either I need you to clear the house so that I can be alone. I need you to take the kids out. Or I need you to ask me what's bothering me. I need you to listen to every single blessed story that you've heard 14 times. I need you to not get hysterical over the fact that I'm crying. Whatever it is that you have your needs, educate them. We're so unfair sometimes when we expect people to know exactly what we need. And this can be said for friends. You know, if we want to replace friends for a second, educate them as to what you need. They want to be there for you, and we want them to be there for us. So just tell them what you need. And that's what I would say is the best thing. And you know what? If you are seeing that the sadness is happening a lot, and I'm not talking about if this is the first year of a Belos for you, then consider looking into what it is that's a major trigger for you and dealing with that, because we don't want our husbands to have to play therapists on a weekly basis. Okay, there was another question here, is what would you say is the difference of the effect on the child between one who loses a mother or father? Very good question. I actually put this a little bit on the stories today. Generally, according to research, a child, the parenting the type of parenting we do is modeled after the same gender parent. And so our parenting game might not be as great if we lost our mothers, if we don't educate ourselves. And ditto for somebody who grew up without a father, who is now a father. That would be his challenge. What's interesting is, according to some of the research, is that if we've lost a father as women, we may struggle more within the marital piece of the relationship much more than the parenting piece. But of course, there are exceptions to every rule, and this is just, one piece of it.
Right. Okay. Someone asked a question privately, so I'm assuming she doesn't want people to see this. She wrote, can people see this? I have a question, but I want it to be private. So I'm just going to answer here. I won't post it, I'll read it. So you could post, if you want, there's a question box on the bottom here. Only I can see it, Sarah Rivkah can't, but I'll just read it out to you. So if someone wants to send it something privately, I'll answer it. Okay, so let me turn it around to the next question in the meantime. Do you see it, or should I zoom in?
Yep, perfect. Another thing I find extremely difficult is that people say time heals. It doesn't. It may make it feel more distant in some ways, but it really, really isn't. We're approaching the 13th Yartzeit of Mitzvah Hashem. The pain is so real. Yes, we can all talk about it openly, Baruch Hashem, and I don't think any of my siblings or myself even try to hide it. We're all super open, but if anything, with each new event, scroll down if you don't mind, thank you, and milestone that life brings, it's a whole new wave of emotions, and the pain is there all over again. Okay, I want to say something about this time heals piece. A lot of people question about the fact that time heals, time doesn't really heal, it does heal. So I'll tell you what I find I find is that, yeah, time heals certain things, and as you said, with each new milestone, there is new grief. The reason for that is when you're 12, you cannot grieve your marriage that your parent wasn't there for. When you get married, you cannot grieve what it's like to have a first baby without a parent. When you have a first baby and then you have a second baby and you're juggling with different roles, you may grieve at that point what it's like not to have a parent. And Emet Hashem, when you make your son's bar mitzvah or when your daughter graduates, you may then look to the empty seat and say, oh, I wish my mother was here to see this. All these milestones within the family, the first sister who will marry off, or the first brother who will marry off a child, and you guys will go back all the way to childhood of like, it's not fair. So what that seems like is the time hasn't healed a blessed thing. Look at us. We're all still struggling. We're all still suffering in that sense. And really the answer to that is you're not struggling or suffering the same things usually. It's usually we've moved on to new struggles. And I know that sounds horrible in some way. But on the other hand, what I'm really trying to say is we heal bits of ourselves. And then with new milestones, there are other parts of ourselves that will begin to be brought to the fore or explored in different ways. And I think that needs to be acknowledged, that it's not about, oh, time heals everything, so now I should never feel pain. You will feel pain. And milestones, by the way, are a biggie, biggie, biggie. Back to that question about how husbands can help. One of the things we all have to acknowledge is that there are certain milestones that, boy, oh boy, are they killers. And I think I have a second for a short story. I have twins. And after the birth of my twins, I lost it completely. I was in Cornell and had a baby at night, and I was starving in the morning. And if anyone has given birth and been starving the next morning, you know what I mean. Starving like I could eat the whole hospital. And I got out of bed because they told me they don't do breakfast in bed anymore to encourage women to walk after birth. And I'm like, some nasty guy who never gave birth thought of this. Anyway, I got out of bed and I get to the hallway and I come there and there are no Chalav Yisrael products left on the tray. And as a matter of fact, I wonder if there were any kosher products, period, left on the tray. Maybe there was some saltines or something. And I just right there in the middle of the hallway burst out crying, and the nurse comes over to me and she says, honey, what's wrong? I said, I just want my mother. And I kid you not, this was like years upon years after my mother passed away. Yes, I was hormonal. Yes, I was a little crazy. Yes, I was starved. Yes, I was after twins. But honestly, that was all I wanted in that moment. So did time not heal? Oh, yes, it did. Did I think at 11 that I was going to have twins and be starving in the hospital and not have anyone? It's in those moments that you feel like nobody would love you maternally like a mother would. And possibly nobody will. We can allow a lot of love into our lives. And I'm gifted with that. And I'm blessed with that. And I'm surrounded by that. And you can be too. But no, there are certain things that mothers know instinctively. And my husband, as blessedly nice as he is, didn't dawn on him after he'd been up all night with this labor to come at 7 o'clock in the morning to the hospital that he was gonna anticipate that I would be starved and that there was gonna be no food, right? Now, the irony of the whole thing was, just so you ever think that your mothers don't listen, my mother doesn't listen a lot of the time. I ask her to come visit, she doesn't come. I ask her to come babysit, she doesn't come. But that day she listened. And in the afternoon, literally, her friend drove in from Muncie, not somebody I have a regular contact with. And she's like, I was going to the city to go shopping with my friends and I heard you had a baby and I figured food is what your mother would have brought. And it was like the sweetest, nicest thing that anybody ever did. So every once in a while we get those hugs. But yeah, it is really, really challenging with each new milestone to hit these kind of rocks, 100%.
Wow. Okay, so we're getting some questions here that people wanted to ask privately.
Sure.
So, hold on. Okay. Trying to figure out where it starts. Here. My sister feels my mother wasn't there emotionally for her growing up. I feel differently. What do you do when she vents on and on about how my mother isn't a mother? My sister is going through her own hardships now too. Not sure.
I'll tell you, I don't know exactly what she wanted to ask, but I think I'm getting it, is that how do we handle the fact that sometimes two people in one family can have two different sets of memories? And I'll go even as far as to say that when you have death, okay, I mean, how much can be argued about how a person died in front of them? And Dr. Tzipora Kozowitz once wrote an article for our magazine about how she and her brother have two distinctly different memories of how their father died of a heart attack. She says, we were both there, and I'm telling you, the stories we tell are completely different. And emotions certainly are subjective. There are perspectives of things. First of all, parents can be different parents to different children. I am promising you that if you were to interview all four of my kids and ask them different questions, please don't, and please don't ever ask them if you meet them, because I still want to be a nice person in your eyes. But if you were to ask each of them about their thoughts about how I do bedtime, I promise you all four of them will have completely different versions. There is one child in this family who believes that I just have a vendetta against all children and I want them in bed as soon as sunset goes. And there's another child who's like, Mommy always lets us stay up late. And there's another one who believes that I sit at their bedside, and there's another one who believes I never sit enough, right? Perspectives. A lot of it is perspectives. A lot of it is based on needs, right? We all have different emotional needs. And I give what I hope is 120% of my emotional love to my children. And I'm telling you that some of the children will absorb it one way and some another way. It just is, because we're all different. So I think acknowledging the fact that, each sibling can come with their own perspective. What to do if she vents to you? I think it's good to have healthy boundaries. So you might want to just say something like, it's really hard for me to hear you talk this way. It seems like there's so much pain there. You really should talk to someone about it. I'm not sure I'm the right person. Can I help you find someone? Because if this is not your experience and this is not a shared experience, it's just going to pull you apart. And like you said, she might be going through her own stuff that might be, putting her perspective in this particular place.
Right. Okay. There's another question. Is there a mother adoption agency? LOL. Need someone to call with all my silly parenting.
This is such a good right? I think, first of all, for a lot of us, we often wish there was like an anonymous hotline where I would know who the people are picking up the phones, but they wouldn't know me, because I don't want to call an anonymous hotline because maybe they're all a bunch of horrible mothers. So I need to know that the good mothers in my book answer the phone calls when I call, but they don't know it's me. Right. Right now, there isn't, but you need to find for yourself, when they say that one mother can do for 10 children, but 10 children can't do for one mother, it's also that one mother has so many parts to her. Unfortunately, when we just had recently a young mother passed away, and she had very young children. And it took, I kid you not, 7 people to continue running that home. One to do the mornings, one to do the evenings, one to help with cooking, one to help with cleaning. Why is that? Because there's a lot of different roles that a mother takes on. So finding one person might not be what works for you. You may need to find a couple of people. I know certainly that's what works for me. There's somebody who I run a lot of my parenting like hashkafically by, like if my kid wants to try something that I'm not sure is appropriate, or I'm not sure how to answer a particular hashkafic related question, I know she's great for that. I don't necessarily feel that she's good with things, other parts of my parenting, but she's so spot on every time on that issue, right? Or somebody who's really creative and always gets for kids some sort of creative chart that she gets her kids to listen. So she's my go-to for those kind of things. So you may need to find a few people in your life. Now, how do you go about finding those people? I found that the more I allowed the relationships in, the more they came to me. There was a woman who I dabbled with in shul for years. Never dawned on me to ask her. And when I just opened myself up to allowing myself to be somewhat vulnerable, obviously protecting my children and myself, but somewhat vulnerable. And I went over to her once and I said, can I ask you a funny question? Your girls were really davening with you Rosh Hashanah and stuff of that sort. And I found that it looked like you just knew when to send the kid out to play and when to keep the kid in. I'm just curious, could I ask you, like, how do you do it? What's your system with them? And it was just like, it developed into a beautiful, beautiful relationship. And I think when we allow those relationships to come in, they come in.
Right. Okay. There's a question here, but I don't see the rest of it. Basically, if I'm not allowed to post it, it skips the bottom. So let's see if we can figure it out. How do I teach my children to respect my mother? She lives in a different country. I'm
assuming it's not about she lives in a different country as much as she probably lives in a different country and there's something that's challenging about her. Let's guess that that's probably what the end is. There's something that's either emotionally challenging about her or maybe challenging religiosity-wise. Something is a challenge about children naturally respecting their grandparents because, of course, we know that the natural tendency of children is to love and respect their grandparents unless proven otherwise. So there is somebody actually on our links team who said something brilliant the other day. She has a relative within her family, one of the grandparents in the family, who is really emotionally incapable of.
She just said it. She doesn't have a relationship with her mother. That was the end of the sentence.
Relationship. That's a little bit of a different question. The question is also if there's a reason that they don't have any contact. Okay, sometimes that's for safety. In which case, we need to protect our children. So we need to know how to do that. But if it's somebody she has minimal contact with, for instance, she calls her mother, a couple of times a year, but she doesn't feel there's anything detrimental to the children having a relationship with their grandparent, then what I would say is encouraging it in small increments where, let's say, we know that, so this relative, this staff member said she encourages her kids to call 10 minutes before this man, Erev Shabbos, so that everyone's rushing and they're like, "Hi, Bubby, we love you, Bubby." Yes, wonderful. And there's very little damage that can be done in that short time span. That's just one trick. If they feel that there's somebody that's going to engage their kids in any sort of conversation, that's not good for them. But you have to always think, a couple of times, why don't I have a relationship with this parent? Is there a reason my children shouldn't have a relationship with this parent? And if there isn't, then encourage the relationship to let it blossom. And I have often heard parents say, Shayla, it would be great for you to call Bobby. They don't necessarily know that you do or don't have, especially if the person's in a different country, how much a relationship you have or not. Writing letters is very, very outdated, but it is so wonderful. I have my kids write cards, and that could also be something that they could develop a relationship through pen paling a little bit.
Right. Okay. I hope she answered, but we have a bunch of questions coming in, and I'm scared who's going to run out. Okay. So, what if you can't find people who you look up to for advice on how to parent?
I'm not in love with all parenting classes, but sometimes if you could listen to samplers and see if there's one that talks to you, and maybe then pay for some one-on-one sessions with that person, that just might be a way to do it.
Right. Okay. As a new spouse to an orphan, anything you have to say?
I'm assuming she's a woman that's a spouse to a male orphan.
I think. It's hard to tell from you.
Right, we're gonna assume that for a second. What I would say is really just be there for them and understand that different people grieve differently. If the person's completely nonchalant, which many men are, just go with it. And I don't think there's anything necessarily that you have to know as much as you're going to have to learn. What are the triggers? What are things, I think in general, orphans make for really good spouses because they really appreciate life and they appreciate motherhood and they appreciate a spouse. But yeah, they sure have their challenges as well. And, just grow with it. And a lot of what we said earlier, that I was giving the woman advice about her, in the marriage piece, just take that.
Right. Oh, I didn't realize that was the end of her question. The beginning was any chance of a Shabbos or an event for young, newish couples who are now dealing with this. Right. That's what she was asking.
That my alumni have asked a lot, because we have Shabbatons that are incredible for the teens, and they've asked a lot for that. It's a question of finances, honestly. So if we were to get a really good, strong group, it may be worth our while. So you can contact the office.
Okay. What are your thoughts on wanting to talk about the lost parent with a spouse, but they didn't continue the question, so I don't know what they want to ask. And then another person asked how to stop transference in older maternal friends. I think you also asked it on there. I think you saved that for the last question.
I was going to get to that question, but it was a very good question, actually. Transference, just to explain to everybody, is when we transfer relationship roles to another person. So what happens is, if you are missing a mother and you find a good older person whose parenting you love, or who feels like they could be warm and loving to you, you may want to attach to them in some way. And there are normal transference roles, which is that it's normal to have some loving feelings when you have someone who loves you. For instance, if you would have had a really good principal or teacher, and in that educational role, that person filled a particular void for you in terms of giving that, then if it has healthy boundaries to it, it could be a really good role. Or if there was a good aunt or grandmother, somebody within a natural relationship. I think the challenge becomes when every older person we meet becomes this way, or when we begin leaning on that person in a way that makes the person uncomfortable or is not sustainable, and therefore what ends up happening is, like, the horns get shed, then you get left as a lump on the side of the road. That's a very scary place to be in. That's why good boundaries in place are really, really, really important for any relationship, but particular a relationship like this. Boundaries have to be respected. Boundaries have to be set up properly, and then it can be really nice to have someone who invites you for Yom Tovim and can show you some love. There's nothing wrong with it. It's not a shameful thing. People think of it as a bad thing, as a needy thing. It's not. We all have different needs, and then we'll be met by different people, and that's okay as long as it's done with healthy boundaries in place. And if you see that you're having trouble with those boundaries, or if everywhere you walk you're seeing mother figures who you need to attach to in some way, and maybe some of them have hurt you, therapy. We need to work through why that is and how to find our triggers.
Right. Okay. The person explained her question. What are your thoughts on wanting to talk about your lost parents with a spouse, but you don't know what to say? If you did, they don't get it.
Okay, so I think there's two parts to this question. Some of us have spouses who would totally get it if we would only talk, but we're afraid to talk. So I think it has to be at an appropriate time. I think doing it at a hectic time, which is so much of what happens, or doing it at a time which is supposed to be like a date night, not always such a good idea. It might need to be like at a designated time. One of the things that I do sometimes is through an album, pulling out an album about this parent and saying, can I show you pictures of my mother? I really want to talk to you about her, but it's kind of hard. But if we look at pictures together and you ask me some questions and I tell you some stuff, it makes it easier. And sometimes also that will bring out the lighthearted pieces of it, as well as obviously the poignant moments. But sometimes there'll be these really funny pictures and he'll say, what? Your mother let you smear chocolate all over your face? Where do you get your neat freak tendencies from? Right? So it allows for that conversation not to be so scary and heavy and stuff of that sort. And I think that's part of what scares, back to the second question, part of what they don't get it, I think, is that I think some spouses are afraid. We're seeing just the top of your forehead.
Trying to read the questions.
No problem. What some spouses have is that they're naturally afraid sometimes of heavy emotions. And that's, we have to respect that different people have different capabilities in terms of that. But in terms of not getting it, they won't get it all the way if they haven't lost a parent. They really won't. But they can have compassion and they can have care and they can listen and they can ask good questions if we allow them to and if we explain to them what we need.
Right. Okay. So another question, how do you explain to children why you don't talk to their grandparents? They are toxic.
Okay, so when there's parental alienation because of a toxic situation, usually what I like to say is if you have a good rub involved, try to get a script there. I found that some of the most fabulous scripts that I've ever seen have come from Rabbanim about how to explain this tightrope, because naturally one of the biggest fears that we have when a child, when there have to be boundaries that are set up between toxic parents and children, is that the children will say, hey, well, when I grow up, I'm not talking to you either, right? So how to explain that fine line, sometimes really smart, savvy Rub can come up with a really good line.
The person that asked the question is the same person that asked earlier, what if you don't have someone to ask the parenting questions to? So they might not have a rabbi to.
One of the things in life is that you need to develop a circle of people to ask, because these types of questions are the tip of the iceberg as to everything else that I can imagine is going on given the circumstances of these two questions. Find a really good Rav. Find one. I keep saying this, but every family situation that we deal with a death, if there was a good, smart family Rav before, I can tell you that half the issues are resolved very quickly and neatly versus not. So that would be really good. In terms of just in general, what we're telling kids, we have to tell them in a very age-appropriate way. If you don't have a Rav, can't find a Rav, don't want to find a Rav, then find a really good from clinical psychologist who can work out the Kibbutz Aim script vis-a-vis developmental psychology. It's not an answer that I would feel ever qualified to give.
Right. Okay. And I think you're going to answer that. Okay. What is a healthy amount of mourning for my father who passed away 7 months ago?
Okay, so let me just say very quickly that I had an opportunity to talk at a secular grief specialist, if you will, a psychologist who specializes in grief. And one of the things he said to me was, you know what, Torah observant Jews really have a really big gift with the fact that there is a step-by-step. We're expected to be hysterical the first 3 days. We're expected to mourn pretty heavily for the first 7. We're expected to have pretty good set of mourning for first 30 days, and then for the first year. So it's certainly you're very early in the game to think about when mourning should end. And like we said before, you know, different milestones will hit you in different ways, but I think in general, allowing the mourning to take its natural, you know, waves. I hate when people say there's like these linear steps to mourning. Nah, grief looks more like a mishka baba like this. That's just what it really looks like. But certainly take the time. Be kind to yourself. And if you're finding it too intense to be able to parent properly or be a proper wife or mother or, you know, keep up with work and stuff like that, then it may be time to look into something else. Low doses of medication sometimes is needed when grief really gets very intense.
Right. Okay. I think we finished all the questions here.
Just because I think we're like a couple of minutes to the hour being up, right?
Right.
Okay. So there was.
You want to go on for something?
I'm sorry. Yeah, there was one little thing. I actually pulled it up here because I love it so much. So in Motherless Mothers, by the way, her title is so magnificent. It's how losing a mother shapes the parent you become. And the reason I love the word shapes is because it's not positive, it's not negative, but it affects us. And we choose what shape we want it to be. So we can choose whether to become the most magnificent parents from not having a mother. We can be the best mother there will ever be, or we can let old habits die.
It's telling me 20 seconds left.
Okay, so that's it. That was really it, is shape yourself into the best mother you can be.